So in this video, we're talking about different things that you can stitch with. So obviously the main thing that you would use is stranded cotton or embroidery floss. So this kind of thing. This is a DMC branded thread, and DMC is the company that makes it. There is also Anchor is another brand. So anchor, like a ship's anchor. So they're the two main brands of stranded cotton that I would use. They're both pretty widely available, though I think Anchor tends to be slightly more popular in Ireland, but DMC seems to be a lot more popular in other countries. They're both very good. There's not really much difference between the quality of thread. But they do slightly different colors, slightly different shades and things. So if you have the opportunity, I would always look at both. So if you're lucky enough to have a shop that stocks both, I would always check both to make sure that you're getting the right shade that you want, because they can be slightly different. So that's stranded cottons or embroidery floss. It has a couple of different names, but that's the most common thing that you would use for embroidery. If you have a sewing kit at home, you'd probably have some normal sewing thread. So quite often this is not 100% cotton. It will be a bit polyester. So it's made of a slightly different material, and it's usually much thinner than even one strand of the stranded cotton. So it's a very thin thread, but you can use it to stitch, absolutely. That's what it's for, obviously. You can stitch with any sort of thread that you find, but it is much thinner, so you would get much thinner lines when you're stitching with it, or you would have to put lots of it together to make it as thick as you want it. So that's sewing thread. This thread also comes in the same way, but you can see that it's much thicker. So compared to this, oops, you can see it's much thicker. So don't get too confused about them. They look very similar, but often the color of the reel can tell you what it's for. So this one with the kind of mint green reel, this is what we call buttonhole thread. So it's a kind of thicker buttonhole thread or top stitch thread. It's much thicker, it's much kind of sturdier, and I would use that mostly for kind of functional stitches if I'm kind of sewing up the back of my embroidery hoop, or if I'm sewing a piece of fabric to a bigger frame, I would use something like this. It's a bit sturdier, but you could stitch decoratively with it as well. Next one I want to talk to you about is pearly thread. So these are both pearly threads. So they come in either skeins like this, or you can get them in a little ball like this. So this again is slightly thicker than your embroidery floss, and it's kind of got this twisted look to it, almost like rope. So it comes in a couple of different sizes. As with needles, the number size is bigger the smaller the number. So like this is pearly number 5, and it's slightly thicker than the pearly number 8. Okay, does that make sense? So you can see slightly thicker. And that's just another type of thread that you can stitch with, that you can get kind of thicker lines with, without having to double up on loads of thread. It gives a slightly different look, it's a slightly different texture. There's no kind of right or wrong with this, whatever you choose to stitch with, whatever kind of look you're going for, it's totally up to you. Here I also have some wool. So this is kind of crewel wool used for crewel work. That's crewel, C-R-E-W-E-L. So it's kind of thinner than wool that you would like knit with or crochet with or anything. But yeah, that's another thing you can use. And then there's also ribbon. So usually silk ribbons like this you would use, but any sort of ribbon will do as well. So silk ribbons are very good. So yeah, you can stitch with anything. If you can fit it in a needle, if you can weave it through a piece of fabric, you can stitch with it. So don't be limiting yourself to these, but this is just kind of common things that you would come across. So most common is stranded cotton, the embroidery floss. You'd also get a lot of pearly, but anything goes really. So if you do find something unusual, if you're stitching with something unusual, do let me know, because I always like to see. Yeah, that's kind of it. If you come across anything else that you think should be included in this, if I've forgotten to mention any type of thread, do let me know. If you have any questions about a type of thread, I'll be happy to answer them. But that's kind of what I thought would be the most common things you come across, the most common things that you would question. So yeah,